We're opening the files on a case that really stands as a stark testament to the limits of forensic science at the time and the chilling persistence of human deception. A mystery born in the brutal cold of a Michigan winter, one that has just defied resolution for more than 6 decades.
January 14th, 1963. 17 below zero in Battle Creek, Michigan. Daisy Zick lies dead in her home. 27 stab wounds. Her hands are bound with her own robe sash. The killer steals her car and just vanishes into the snow.
And right from the start, the confusion, it just got deeper.
The postal carrier, a man named William Daly, says he saw a stranger.
Okay.
But his story changes almost immediately. First, he claims he saw a man, but then later a woman. He says the Zick garage door was closed.
But that wasn't right, was it?
No. Every other witness says it was wide open. And then you have a man seen driving Daisy Zick's stolen car, and he's wearing a Navy jacket.
Let me guess.
The postal carrier owns that exact jacket, and get this, he stops wearing it right after the murder.
Wow.
He comes home drunk that night, tells his daughter-in-law that Daisy had it coming. Police, of course, they want a polygraph. He refuses.
For how long?
For 48 years.
He dies in 2011 without ever confessing. So 62 years later, the truth, the real truth, is buried with him. Did William Daly kill Daisy Zick? We are going to dissect the evidence, the failures of the original investigation, and see if we can find out.
Welcome to Whispers of Crime.
Today we're focusing on a case that continues to haunt the history of Michigan, a murder that is still officially unsolved, known locally as Michigan's #1 murder mystery. Our mission here is to meticulously scrutinize the really contradictory witness testimonies to understand the critical timeline of the attack and to analyze decades of evidence around the brutal murder of 42-year-old Daisy Zick. We're looking not just at the crime itself, but at the systematic sort of institutional limitations and failures that may have allowed the primary suspect to evade justice for nearly 5 decades.
Right. This kind of analysis demands we approach this tragic event with the disciplined eye of an investigator and, the patience of a historian. We have to establish the precise sequence of events, understand the devastating impact of 1963 forensic limitations, and hold every single inconsistency from the key people involved up to the light. The pursuit of truth here is just. It's complex. It's tangled in rumor, small-town morality, and, frankly, outright lies.
Before we step into that biting cold morning of January 14th, 1963, we have to understand the victim. Who was Daisy Zick? She was 42 years old, a grandmother, a respected, reliable worker at the Kellogg's factory, which was a massive employer in Battle Creek. But the sources, they reveal a woman defined by a difficult yet resilient personal history.
Daisy was born into rural poverty in 1919. Her early life was marked by hardship, which she worked very hard to overcome. She had this outgoing and charming personality, traits that, allowed her to navigate the social currents of Battle Creek. But her personal life was undeniably complex, and that factor tragically colored the entire investigation that followed.
Her first marriage was to a man named Neville King. It began when she was just 14. That 3-year union was volatile, characterized by both physical and verbal abuse. It was only after she became pregnant with her son, Jim, that she found the courage to leave. She later married Floyd Zick, which it started as a promising partnership, but it really deteriorated by the early 1960s, driven largely by Floyd's increasing struggles with severe alcoholism. And this situation, it led to infidelity on both sides.
And this right here, this is where the investigation hit its first major pitfall. Her complex private life, her choice to pursue relationships outside of her troubled marriage, it immediately became the primary lens through which the police and the community viewed her death.
Absolutely. The initial investigative theories centered almost entirely on her affairs, particularly those at the Kellogg Corporation plant. And while starting with the victim's close contacts as standard procedure, focusing so heavily on her, let's say, perceived moral failings, it really seemed to divert the pure criminal inquiry.
It was a disastrous case of moral judgment overriding objective investigation. It really was. The aggressive focus on Daisy's choices meant that people like her friend Audrey, who was questioned intensely by the prosecutor, were pushed to tears as investigators dug into her life, rather than focusing on the mechanics of the murder itself.
And in a conservative Midwestern town in the 1960s, that kind of moralistic climate, it just permeated everything.
It did. We know that several marriages in the community actually broke up just because investigators were digging through all these workplace entanglements, and they still weren't finding the killer.
So if the focus immediately shifts away from honoring Daisy Zick as a victim of just horrific violence, and it moves towards judging the life she chose to lead, Doesn't that fundamentally compromise the case? I mean, doesn't it blind investigators to other possibilities like a random encounter or a grudge totally unrelated to romance?
That is precisely the analytical point we have to pull from the sources. The sheer brutality, 27 stab wounds, the pursuit, the use of her own sash to bind her, it suggests a profound rage-fueled attack. This level of violence, what we call overkill, is often indicative of an extremely personal motive. But that motive is not always a spurned lover.
Right.
It could be any perceived slight or simply a violent personality acting out. By fixating on infidelity, they really limited the scope of the killer's profile.
So let's turn to the day itself. Tuesday, January 14th, 1963. The conditions alone seem almost designed to guarantee the killer's anonymity.
The environmental factors were absolutely critical here. Battle Creek was in the grip of a severe cold snap. Temperatures were plunging, officially recorded between 10 and 17 degrees below zero Fahrenheit.
And the wind.
Crucially, yes, the air was churned by 25-mile-per-hour winds, whipping intense snow into near-whiteout conditions.
And what was the significance of that extreme weather in investigative terms?
Two things. First, anyone outdoors was necessarily obscured by heavy winter clothing, bulky coats, hats pulled low, scarves, which makes detailed, reliable eyewitness identification virtually impossible.
Okay.
And second, and this is just as damaging, the extreme cold and the snow compromised the collection and preservation of trace evidence almost immediately. The scene was contaminated long before forensics could arrive and properly process it.
Okay, let's reconstruct the violent sequence of the attack. Let's move through the Zick home using the physical evidence as our guide. This timeline begins right after the weather got to its worst.
We begin with the first anomaly, observed around 9:30 a.m. A cleaning woman who was familiar with the neighborhood routine noticed that the Zick family's curtains were drawn closed.
And that was unusual.
Highly unusual. Daisy invariably kept them open, often until 11 a.m. when she'd start her afternoon preparations. This is our first sign that something is very wrong inside that house.
And then the unknown presence.
Yes. Around 10 a.m., a neighbor, Mrs. DeFrance, she saw an unfamiliar man, a stranger, in the Zick family's outdoor breezeway. Now, Daisy was known to entertain male visitors, but rarely this early. No one, however, thought it was suspicious enough to call the authorities right then.
So the timeline establishes the killer entered sometime between 9:30 and 10:00 a.m. Where did the physical confrontation start?
The forensic analysis strongly suggests the initial chaotic altercation started right there in the kitchen. Investigators found the kitchen rug bunched up, distorted violently, which confirms a struggle took place. Evidence suggests Daisy had just begun her morning routine. They found makeup smears on her blouse, which indicated she was preparing for a planned coffee meeting with her friend Audrey. Her daily routine was just violently interrupted.
The sources mention a calculated attempt by the killer to isolate her.
Absolutely. Daisy made a desperate, momentary bid to call for help. But the killer, exhibiting a chilling level of calculation, severed the phone line.
With what?
The weapon used was believed to be a specialized knife, possibly something called a spoilage knife.
What is that?
So in a big facility like Kellogg's, a spoilage knife is a heavy utility knife. You'd use it for opening damaged boxes, cutting thick tape, inspecting spoiled goods. It's a robust, sharp tool that would be readily available to a factory employee.
So that detail immediately tethered the weapon and the killer back to that world, even if not directly to one of her known affairs.
Exactly.
To cut a phone line in the middle of a struggle, that suggests a level of premeditation or at least immediate ruthless control. It doesn't quite fit the profile of pure blind rage. It suggests an intent to finish the act without any interruption. What happened after the phone line was cut?
The struggle moved rapidly to the master bedroom. The chaos was obvious. An imprint of Daisy's body was found on the floor, indicating she was either pinned down or thrown with great force. Scattered across the bed were broken fingernails. Clear evidence of a truly vigorous, desperate struggle for her life. It's then that the killer bound her hands behind her back, using a sash from her own robe, a detail that emphasizes the improvised yet controlled nature of the attack.
And it was while she was restrained that the most devastating injuries occurred.
Correct. The forensic exam confirmed that multiple stab wounds were inflicted while Daisy was bound and largely defenseless. Yet the sources underscore her immense will to live. Despite these initial severe wounds, she somehow managed to break free from her restraints.
Just a superhuman effort.
It really was. She made a final desperate attempt to escape from the master bedroom and fled towards the guest bedroom.
An act of incredible bravery and survival instinct. The killer pursued her.
Relentlessly. The physical evidence shows the killer tracked her into the guest bedroom. Daisy, maybe seeking shelter or trying to use furniture as a shield, collapsed behind the heavy stereo system. The assailant violently yanked the massive old-style hi-fi unit out of the way and just continued the assault with unchecked ferocity. Daisy finally succumbed to the attack, collapsing against the wall, pulling the stereo unit down with her as she died. The final count was 27 stab wounds.
27 stab wounds. That figure, more than anything else, it dictates the emotional context of this crime. It speaks to a level of intimate rage or sustained personal malice.
It screams of rage, yes. This was not a quick clinical murder. It was an execution driven by powerful emotion. After inflicting these horrific injuries, the assailant then performed a chillingly calm, calculated action. They went through Daisy's purse, stole about $45 in cash and her car keys. Then they fled the scene in her distinctive 1957 white Pontiac Bonneville.
The theft of the cash and the car keys immediately complicates the motive. Was this a personal rage killing, or did it start as a robbery that devolved into this extreme violence?
That ambiguity was paralyzing for the initial investigation. The car, that white Pontiac, was later seen being driven erratically on Michigan Avenue, swerving, stopping before it was just abandoned on a busy road in Calhoun County. Witnesses confirmed seeing the driver ditch the car and walk away, vanishing into the snow.
So the police response was swift. It involved the Battle Creek Police, the Michigan State Police, and eventually the FBI. Detectives Charlie Kahn and Wayne R. Fitch, the chief investigator, they led the processing of the crime scene.
And they faced immediate obstacles. What could they really recover from a high-gloss home interior covered in evidence compromised by extreme cold using 1963 forensic standards? It was a nightmare.
What were the concrete pieces of evidence they managed to secure?
The list is tragically short and frustratingly ambiguous. They collected one white button from the floor and, crucially, some yellow cotton fibers, which were consistent with the material used in cheap winter gloves.
Okay, the gloves are important.
Very. These fibers were found both inside the house near the body and in the abandoned getaway car. They recovered a kitchen knife, the potential murder weapon, but it only had a microscopic blood smear on it. They lifted 12 sets of fingerprints from various spots in the house and the car and noted blood smears on the car's exterior.
12 sets of fingerprints sounds promising, but was 1963 technology good enough to make a definitive match?
Not effectively, no. This is one of the case's key analytical limitations. The high-gloss surfaces in the Zick home, they either absorbed or just obscured many of the prints. And you have to remember, fingerprint analysis back then relied on slow, manual cross-referencing against existing police records. Compared to today's AFIS systems, it was rudimentary.
And no DNA.
Most critically, no DNA. The yellow fibers were suggestive, but fiber analysis was limited. The cold meant any blood spatter or other fragile trace evidence was almost certainly degraded or lost. They had pieces, but no reliable way to assemble the whole picture.
So with weak physical evidence, investigators pivoted hard to the social environment, the Kellogg's connection, operating under the assumption of a jealous lover.
That became the intense focus for the first 3 months. Detective Kahn discovered love notes and gifts in Daisy's employee locker addressed to and from Raymond Honey, who was Raymond Mercer. Mercer was immediately identified as a clear suspect. He'd been in a relationship with Daisy for 2 years.
A clear motive, a clear suspect. What happened when they investigated Mercer?
He was quickly and definitively cleared. Mercer provided an airtight alibi that was corroborated by multiple people. Furthermore, he willingly submitted to a polygraph test, which was a technology they relied on heavily back then, and he passed without any question.
And her husband?
They also investigated her husband, Floyd Zick. He had a solid alibi, he was at work at the factory, and he also willingly submitted to and passed a polygraph.
That must have been profoundly frustrating for the team. The most logical theories, the jealous husband, the spurned lover, they just vanish immediately with solid alibis and reliable polygraph results.
It was an investigative dead end. They reviewed over 100 employees at the Kellogg plant. And that search, while it uncovered a lot of other infidelities that ruined marriages in the community, it yielded absolutely no productive leads for Daisy's murder. The killer was clearly not an obvious jealous lover from the factory floor. Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Remember to check out our recent release crime cases like this.
It wasn't until 2 months after the murder that they caught a crucial break, and it was prompted by a public appeal.
Exactly. Prosecutor Noble Moore held a press conference pleading for public information. This appeal brought forward a 49-year-old man named Gerrit Vandermeer on March 23, 1963, and his testimony proved to be the single most reliable eyewitness account they would ever get.
What specifically did Vandermeer see that morning?
Around 11 a.m. on January 14th, he saw Daisy's white Pontiac driving erratically on Michigan Avenue. The driver seemed distressed, swerving and pausing before pulling the car over and abandoning it. Vandermeer was critical because he confirmed the driver was a man and provided detailed physical observations, even with the bad weather.
Tell us about that description. We noted that the heavy winter clothing obscured a lot, but this witness managed to capture some highly specific details.
Vandermeer was incredibly precise. He described a man, maybe 150 to 175 pounds, about 5'8". He noted the man had a bit of color in his face, a reddish complexion, maybe from the cold or exertion. He was wearing a dark blue or navy jacket. But the most important detail was the hair. Dark, combed straight back with a part that puffed up in the front and had a little wave to it. This distinctive hairstyle and that specific jacket became critical pieces of the investigation.
So if the initial theories were all about her personal romantic life, how did this specific late eyewitness account suddenly shift the focus? It seems to point to a random person, or at least someone outside that immediate circle of lovers.
This description essentially established a benchmark for the killer's physical profile. It shifted the investigation away from alibis and love notes and toward physical resemblance and clothing. And critically, this description was completely and irrefutably at odds with the changing, inconsistent stories offered by the only other person claiming to have been in that immediate area and seen the driver. William Daley, the Zick's postal carrier.
And just as they had this crucial, tangible lead, the investigation suffered a huge institutional blow.
A terrible misfortune. On May 7, 1963, only a few months into the investigation, Detective Wayne R. Fitch, the chief investigator, the man coordinating this whole complex search, died suddenly of a heart attack while mowing his lawn.
Wow.
His death was devastating. It profoundly affected the investigation's momentum, it disrupted continuity, and it resulted in the loss of deep, internalized knowledge about the case. By 1964, the anonymous tips stopped. The case went completely cold for 3 long years.
The case remained dormant until 1967. And this is the moment Detective Leroy Steinbacher enters the story and just fundamentally changes the focus, zeroing in on the man who had been a mere peripheral witness 4 years earlier, William Newman Daley.
Steinbacher was a dedicated, tenacious young investigator with the Michigan State Police. He received an anonymous tip that breathed new life into the dormant case. The tip specifically named William Newman Daley, who had originally been questioned only because he was the Zick's postal carrier and had a professional reason to be in the neighborhood that morning.
And the information that came with the tip was profoundly disturbing.
It was the trigger for action. The informant told Steinbacher that Daley had been drinking heavily at a local bar. When he was refused by a woman he approached, he allegedly threatened her by saying he was about to do to her what had been done to Daisy Zick.
That is not subtle.
Not at all. This wasn't idle gossip. This was a highly specific threat linking him directly to the crime.
And that postal carrier job, it gave the killer the perfect, unimpeachable alibi for his presence in the area at 10 or 11 in the morning, didn't it?
It was the ultimate cover. Delivering mail required him to visit homes throughout that exact neighborhood every single day. Steinbacher immediately began a comprehensive investigation into Daley, who was 42 at the time, and quickly amassed what can only be described as a mountain of compelling circumstantial evidence. Unlike the initial theories, this evidence centered entirely on deliberate deception, physical resemblance, and established patterns of violent behavior.
Okay, let's meticulously analyze the inconsistencies Steinbacher uncovered in Daley's original 1963 testimony when you compare it to other independent witnesses.
The discrepancies were glaring. First, the garage door. Daley claimed the Zick garage door was closed when he passed the house around 11 a.m. This was a direct, irrefutable contradiction of nearly every other witness who testified, including neighbors, all of whom said the garage door was wide open.
Why lie about something like a garage door? It seems so trivial.
But a simple lie about a trivial detail suggests the person is building an intentional narrative, one designed to protect himself. If the door was open, it suggests the killer left in a hurry. If Daley claimed it was closed, he could be trying to distance himself from the known facts of the scene and the getaway.
And his sighting of the driver was just as unreliable.
Completely. Daley's story flip-flopped under pressure. He initially claimed he saw a man on Michigan Avenue, which sort of aligned with Vandermeer's testimony. But when Steinbacher pressed him later, Daly became visibly uneasy and changed his story entirely. Now he's claiming he actually saw a woman near the abandoned car.
A woman?
A woman. That drastic change man to woman was a huge red flag for Steinbacher. It suggested calculated evasion, not a simple lapse of memory. And what's more, police interviewed multiple drivers who took that exact same route that morning, and none of them reported seeing the mysterious figure Daly had originally described.
Beyond the blatant contradictions, what behavioral evidence did Steinbacher compile that linked Daly to the physical description from Vandermeer?
There were several critical links. Daly's coworker, Beverly Eden, provided a key piece of information about his clothing. She confirmed that Daly owned a dark navy peacoat, a jacket matching the one Vandermeer described the driver wearing, and she specifically noted that Daly had stopped wearing it after the incident.
The jacket just disappeared from his daily wardrobe right after the murder.
That is the inescapable implication, either disposed of or maybe stained. Furthermore, Vandermeer's distinctive description of the hair dark, combed straight back with a part that puffed up in the front and had a little wave to it, was a precise match for William Daly's known unique hairstyle.
So you have a man who was on the scene who lied about critical details, who matched the most reliable physical description, and who immediately stops wearing a jacket that matches the killer's clothing.
Exactly.
Steinbacher also uncovered some alarming signs about Daly's psychological state and an intent to flee the area right after the murder.
Daly revealed to investigators that he had immediate plans to leave Battle Creek for Panama City. This was just days after the murder. While he didn't end up going, investigators rightly saw this as a profound flight risk, indicating acute stress or a desire to escape scrutiny. For a settled postal carrier to suddenly plan a move to Panama City, it was highly suspicious.
This collection of circumstantial evidence is already very compelling, but the documented violence in his character is perhaps the most damning behavioral trait.
The sources confirmed Daly had a history of what was described as a frequently violent temper and was known specifically for choking behavior, which is a highly personal and controlling act of violence. And this wasn't just hearsay. In 1966, Daly was arrested for a severe violent assault. He parked near his ex-wife's home, forcibly kicked in her door, and assaulted her new boyfriend. His documented history demonstrated a clear, proven capacity for the kind of sudden, explosive violence we saw inflicted on Daisy Zick.
The testimony of his daughter-in-law, Susan Denny, seems to provide the closest thing we have to a direct, if implied, admission of guilt. We need to spend time analyzing the full impact of her statements.
Susan Denny's testimony is the emotional core of the case against Daly. She testified that on the very day of the murder, Daly came home drunk, visibly upset, and mentioned the Zick girl, explicitly stating she had it coming.
Had it coming. That's just chilling. It suggests not only knowledge of her death, but this malicious belief that she deserved what happened to her, a total lack of remorse.
And a personal grievance against Daisy, regardless of the motive.
And the second part of her testimony, years later, tied that malice directly to his own capacity for violence.
Exactly. After a separate, unrelated violent attack Daly perpetrated against Denny herself, he menacingly told her that he knew who had killed Daisy Zick.
So, how do we interpret that? Could that phrase, knew who had killed Daisy Zick, be him deflecting, pointing to someone else he genuinely thought was guilty? Or does his behavioral pattern just force us toward the conclusion that it was a confessional threat?
I think that's the crucial question for analysis. Given his documented violent history, the context matters immensely. When he makes that statement while attacking his own daughter-in-law, the analytical weight leans heavily toward it being a confessional threat, a way to terrorize his victim by linking his current violence to a notorious unsolved murder.
He's using the murder as a template for his own capacity for violence.
It certainly seems that way. Less like sharing information and more like a threat.
So given all of this circumstantial evidence, the changing stories, the physical matches, the violent history, the incriminating statements, why did investigators never manage to secure a confession or an arrest? Why couldn't they turn this mountain of evidence into a prosecutable case?
This brings us to the single biggest red flag in the entire history of this investigation, the polygraph standoff. In the 1960s, while not admissible in court, polygraphs were a critical investigative tool. Floyd Zick and Raymond Mercer willingly took them and passed. William Daly, however, point-blank refused.
So if the victim's husband and her lover willingly submit and pass, what does Daly's lifelong categorical refusal signal to investigators? To us?
It signals profound evasion and, most likely, guilt. His refusal was absolute. It lasted for nearly half a century. Daly tried to justify this with more obvious lies, claiming police had forced him to sit down for one lie detector test after another, which was a fabrication. He never took a single test.
It's a screaming admission of fear, if not guilt.
It is, and it prevented investigators from either definitively exonerating him or, crucially, gaining the psychological leverage needed to push a suspect toward a confession, especially in a case lacking hard forensic evidence.
The motive remains the one significant hole in the case against him. Does the source material give us any clear indication as to why he might have targeted Daisy Zick?
The motive remains the weakest link, which certainly made it harder to bring charges. No definitive connection like a shared romantic history or a financial dispute ever fully emerged. Investigators theorized several possibilities, all rooted in his known character. An unrequited affair, spurned stalker behavior, or just a random violent impulse that Daly acted upon in the moment. Given his history of explosive, unprovoked violence, a random act or an unrecorded personal grievance are strong possibilities, even if they lack concrete proof.
And while Steinbacher was putting all this pressure on Daly, the investigation was still being sidetracked by noise and false leads, wasting valuable time.
The journey was plagued by false positives. In 1966, a jailhouse inmate named George Borden tried to gain favor by naming Norman Baker as the killer, claiming Baker had confessed to him. Baker was investigated, but quickly dismissed because his story just didn't match the crime scene details.
A classic jailhouse confession.
Exactly. And then there was the tragic case of Albert Cooley, an avenue of inquiry that closed permanently before it could even be explored.
What happened there?
Cooley became a suspect in 1965 after an anonymous tip. But before police could even administer a polygraph test to him, Cooley committed suicide.
So his death raised immediate dark suspicions, but provided no answers.
None. It just closed off another potential path to the truth.
Ultimately, the pressure on Daly subsided when the key investigative driver retired.
In 1973, Detective Steinbacher, the man who had tirelessly pursued Daly, retired from the Michigan State Police. His departure created a massive institutional void. Without his focused determination and deep knowledge of Daly's history, the case's momentum just duffled. It ceased. The institutional knowledge faded, and the case went cold again for decades.
It's astounding that despite all that suspicion, Daly was able to live freely for decades, carrying that secret. There was one final, desperate attempt to get the truth much later when his life was supposedly ending.
Yes. In the year 2000, police made a final dramatic attempt to get a confession from William Daly while he was hospitalized and believed to be on his deathbed. Investigators hoped that, facing mortality, he might finally unburden himself.
Did it work?
Tragically, no. Daly recovered from the illness. He remained absolutely steadfast in his refusal to take a polygraph and certainly refused to confess. He carried on that refusal for another 11 years.
So if William Daly was the killer, he successfully took the definitive truth to his grave, leaving this 62-year wound of ambiguity and injustice in the Battle Creek community.
That is the hard reality. William Newman Daly died in April 2011 from cancer. He was never charged, never confessed, and never submitted to the polygraph. If he was the murderer of Daisy Zick, he achieved a complete and successful evasion of the judicial process.
The case remains officially unsolved, bringing no definitive closure to Daisy's family. But the legacy of this case extends beyond just the missing answer. It speaks to the devastating impact of small-town gossip and how moralistic judgment can derail a criminal investigation.
The initial investigation, because it focused so heavily on Daisy's personal life, was fundamentally corrupted by that moral judgment. The sources clearly show that the public, and even some investigators, viewed her choices as relevant to the violence inflicted upon her. As we established, this inquest into her affairs wasted critical time, it broke up marriages, and it diverted attention from a different killer profile entirely.
The tragedy here is how the investigation allowed moral judgment of Daisy's choices to compromise its focus. We have to remember Daisy Zick was a victim of brutal, sustained violence, and her personal choices in no way justify or excuse the ferocity of her murder. That violence demands justice, regardless of the complexity of her life.
Absolutely. When we look back over the 6 decades of this cold case, we can summarize the specific reasons why it remains unsolved, and it really provides a textbook example of cold case limitations.
What were the 3 main culprits that doomed the original investigation?
First, the technological limitations. The limited physical evidence, combined with the rudimentary 1963 forensic capabilities, meant no DNA analysis could be done. The dozen fingerprints they collected couldn't be conclusively matched. The most crucial evidence, those yellow fibers, the microscopic blood smear, were potentially compromised by weather or just by storage limitations.
And second, the human factors, the witnesses and the suspect.
The extreme weather severely limited reliable eyewitness testimony, which made Vandermeer's account a needle in a haystack. But perhaps the most significant human factor was William Daley's lifelong categorical polygraph refusal. It removed the single most effective tool investigators had to apply pressure or get the corroboration they needed for charges.
And finally, the institutional failures and just the sheer passage of time.
The institutional failures were devastating. The loss of key personnel, Detective Fitch's sudden death and Detective Steinbacher's retirement, severely impacted the case's continuity. It ensured that momentum was lost precisely when it was most needed. That institutional knowledge often walks out the door with the retiring officer.
Despite the decades that have passed, the case continues to resonate and get attention, fueled by the hope that modern technology might still provide that definitive link.
It has received significant renewed interest. In 2013, author Blaine L. Pardoe published Murder in Battle Creek, meticulously presenting all the known facts and shining a light specifically on the compelling circumstantial evidence against Daley. The book successfully spurred new tips, which Pardoe actively reported to authorities, keeping the pressure on.
And the media visibility since then has ensured the file remains open.
Yes. The case has been featured in numerous true crime podcasts and analyses between 2021 and 2024. The most recently, Real Crime magazine featured a substantial piece in 2024, confirming its status as a compelling, enduring cold case. The Michigan State Police officially maintain the case as open.
The persistence of this mystery often brings us back to William Daley. If he was the killer, his pattern of behavior, the contradictions, the violence, the refusal to cooperate, that's the strongest indicator we have.
When we connect this pattern to the broader analytic picture, Daley's inconsistent testimonies alone, switching from seeing a man to a woman lying about the garage door, it shows a calculated, desperate attempt to mislead the investigation. This deception, compounded by his history of documented domestic violence and the fact he matched Vandermeer's physical description, forms the most compelling analytical key we have to the truth of this crime. He demonstrated both the opportunity and the capacity for the kind of violence Daisy suffered.
So what does this all mean for the possibility of justice today, 62 years later? What is the only pathway left?
The only definitive pathway to justice now lies entirely in advanced forensic DNA technology. The hope rests on whether the limited evidence collected in 1963, the yellow fibers, the microscopic blood smear on the knife, or the trace blood smears on the car, was preserved well enough to survive over 60 years of storage.
So if they can extract viable DNA from any of those elements.
If they can. That sample can be run against modern familial and genealogical databases. That thin thread of cold, preserved evidence is the only thing about which Daisy Zick's chance for final closure now hinges. Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Remember to check out our recent released crime cases like this.